Okay, welcome back to our discussion on building APIs with Go. So in this lesson, I want us to focus on logging. So currently, in terms of logging, we have our very basic logger. So we created a logger here, and that's it. And so what we want to do is to add a bit more sophistication to our logging, and also to be able to generate our logging information, of course stating whether it's an error or whether it's something fatal or whether it's just information, similar to what we did in the first series in Introduction to Programming with Go and Building Web Applications. So in this version, in this series, I want us to generate those messages using or in JSON. So for example, I could say level, info, time, the message, and any properties related to that message, right? Such as the address of the server and whether it's what environment we're using, whether it's development or testing and so on. So at the end of this lesson, when we start up our server, we will see the logging information generated and displayed as a JSON or as JSON. All right, so let's get started. And so we will need to create a new package. Okay, so let's just start with that. I'm going to go to internal. Okay, so let me do that from the terminal since it's going to be faster. So I'm going to make a directory named JSON log. Right, and that directory will be inside of internal. Right, so we got that right here. And the file I want to create inside JSON log, let me use touch, is going to be named JSON log. .go. Okay, great. So we have our file right here, and let's start writing our code. So of course, file name will be internal. Great. So we'll have our package JSON log, and let me simply import the packages that we will need. Even though the way I have Visual Studio Code set up, it would do it for me automatically. But let me just include them. So we'll definitely need the JSON package, and we'll definitely need IO because we want to implement the IO writer interface. We'll definitely need OS, and of course we'll need runtime debug to be able to print the stack trace in case of a in case the client wants to see that, or in case we have to bail, we have a fatal error and we want to show that. Okay. We'll also need to use sync because we need to have a mutex to be able to effectively or correctly write to the log file. Okay, and of course time. Okay, so the first thing we need to consider is the different levels of logging. So for example, is a log message simply information? Is a log message an error message? Is the log message a fatal message? Okay, or maybe we want to turn off logging. Right? So let's just create a new type. Okay. So we can have different severity levels of logging entries. Okay, so I'm going to create a type, and this type will be called level, and it will be int 8. Okay, all I'm going to do is to specify our levels. So levels start at 0. Right, so I'm going to create const, and I'm going to say level info. All right, and so I want to assign level info a certain value. So level info is of type level, meaning it's an int 8. But again, we want to use the name level info. All right, and so I will use the Iota, which simply means to tell Go start creating a sequence. Okay, and so the value will be 0 here, right? And so Iota will just keep incrementing by 1. So when I say level error, that will have value 1, right? And then level fatal is the next error level, and that will have value of 2. And then let's be able to turn off logging if we wish. So level off, okay, that's another level, and that value is 3. Right, so these are the logging levels. Again, we're not going to explicitly use 0, 1, 2, 3. We're going to use their representative human readable name instead, which is level info, level error, level fatal, and level off. But of course, Go internally will use numbers. So once you have the different levels, let's do something that will be useful, and that is to be able to create human readable forms of our levels. Right? So the severity levels as a human readable friendly format. And so what I'm going to do is to create a function, well actually a method, on level, and this method will simply be named string, and it will return a string. So whenever I call it, it will switch on L, and if the case is level info, then it knows to return the string info. Right? Likewise, if the case that it gets is level error, it knows to return error. And lastly, if it's level fatal, then it knows to return the string fatal. Okay. And let's have a default, which will simply be return the empty string. All right. So again, that's how we would convert the internal representation of our severity levels to actual strings that we can then use. Okay, so once we have that, so we have the different levels. We have how to take those levels and make them become strings. So let's actually get to the task, which is the whole point, and that is a logger. So we need to define a custom logger that is able to do all the things we want, such as make it a JSON format, incorporate the time, um, any properties, a message, and so on. All right. Okay, so let's get started. We need to create a new type, of course, which we will name logger. All right, so we need a logger type. So what does a logger contain? Well, we need the logger should have the ability to be told where to log the messages, where to write the messages to. Should it write it to the console? Should it write it to a file? And so on. So we're going to have a field name out of type IO writer. So anything that we use must implement the IO or the writer interface. Okay. We need to know the minimum level that we are looking for. So we might not want to log every message. We might want to only log the ones that meet a minimum. So for example, we might say we only want messages to be logged that are at least a error level. So error and fatal, log them. Info, don't log them. All right. And finally, we need a mutex, and the reason, of course, is because if we have different Go routines, right, writing to the same log, then what prevents one from overwriting the other? Or what prevents one from writing on a line and another writing on that same line? So we get the log messages all jumbled up. So we need a mutex which will stop, or which will sort of coordinate the writing of the log messages. So when one Go routine is writing its message, then others who want to also write will have to wait. All right, so we have that, and so let's just create a method. Actually, let's create a function. So the new function creates a new instance of logger. We did the same thing when we wrote the code, the validation code, where we created a new function that returns an instance of the validator type. So we'll do the same thing here. We're going to name it new, and it's going to take out, of course, which is of type IO dot writer. And we will also pass in the min level, which is of type level. So once we know those two things, then we are able to create a logger. All right. Okay, so yeah, I'm forgetting my closing. Okay, great. So that's my function. Let's remove that. Okay. All right. So let's just create my function, and it's very simple. We're just going to return a new logger. And this logger will contain in the out field out, and the min level will be min level. Okay. All right. So we don't need to pass in anything for the mutex because we will be dealing with that ourselves. All right. Okay. So those are the only things we need to create a new logger. Where to write to, and what is the minimum level we should look for to actually start writing. Okay, so I'll leave it here for this lesson, for this video. In the next video, we will proceed to writing helper methods on logger that helps in writing those messages. I'll see you in that next lesson.